Back as promised with my friend and colleague Rachel Maddow as we count down to the documentary Separated right here on MSNBC. Rachel, it is great to have you on the show. Of course, we wanted to get you on ahead of tonight's film because I think, you have reporting on the actions that helped stop the cruelty that has been the focus of this for several years. Walk us through it.
Eamon, first of all, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate getting some of your real estate on your show here on Saturday night. I'm really grateful to be here. But I've also just been really excited for a long time that we are finally now premiering this new documentary, Separated. I think most folks watching at home may have heard something about this film. You should know that it is by America's most celebrated living documentary filmmaker. This film was made by Academy Award-winning master of the genre, Errol Morris. Any Errol Morris film on any subject you should see. This one, though, is really important. It's really something. It's been showing in theaters and sold-out screenings all over the country. It's aired at big film festivals like Venice and Telluride. But tonight it is here on MSNBC. And there's a couple things I think folks should keep in mind in terms of this current moment when you watch Separated tonight. It's going to start just a few minutes from now. But I think the first thing to keep in mind is that this is not a done story. It is not over. MSNBC viewers are probably familiar with the basic fact that in the first Trump administration in 2017, 2018, they took somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 kids away from their parents before a court ordered them to stop doing it. And one of the heroes of the film, who you will see when we show the film tonight, again, it's about 20 minutes from now it starts, one of the heroes is Lee Gelernt from the ACLU. He brought the class action lawsuit that shut down the policy, and that itself is an incredible story. In advance of the film premiering here tonight on MSNBC, we spoke with Lee Gelernt this week. He stressed to us that although the policy was stopped by the courts in the first Trump term, the effect of what the policy did still has not been fixed. There are still families that the government never managed to put back together after U.S. government officials forced them apart. Exactly how many kids still have never got back to their parents, we can't be totally sure to a one. And that's because the policy was such a mess. It was such a chaotic and intentionally cruel mess. And so that's, I think, one thing to keep in mind. Now that Trump has been reelected, I think sometimes people talk about their expectations for a second Trump term. You'll hear people say things like, oh, maybe one of the things that might mitigate the worst potential harm and damage is that at least in the first Trump term, we saw things were pretty shambolic. You hear people argue this all the time. Whatever their intentions, they just weren't that good at doing any of the things they wanted to do. And conceptually, I get that that makes sense. Right? If somebody's coming after you, you want them to be tripping on their untied shoelaces or forgetting their keys or whatever. But in real life, in the government, the shambolic and disorganized nature of the Trump administration policy to take kids away from their parents, specifically their disorganization, their messy incompetence, didn't make things better. It made things profoundly worse for so many of these families. It made it so that today, still in 2024, some kids have not been reunited with the parents from whom they were stolen. So that's one thing to know in watching Separated tonight. The problem caused here, still an ongoing problem for some families. The other thing to know about Separated is that to the extent that the government has been able to reunify kids with their parents, it's because there were some heroes in this story, and it wasn't just outside lawyers like Lee Gelernt who stopped the policy thanks to the courts. It was also some people inside the government, career civil servants who realized what was happening at the time. And these were not people who felt like they had the capacity to stop the Trump administration's policy overall. But they did mitigate it. They did come up with ways, for example, to track the kids who had been taken away from their parents. And they did this even when their bosses didn't want them to. While the policy was still in effect, what those civil servants did, among other things, it made it possible for the public to see what was happening and to demand that it stop. This, for example, was on the front page of the New York Times, April 2018. You see the headline there. Hundreds of immigrant children have been taken from parents at U.S. border. Caitlin Dickerson reporting for the New York Times. Her report said, quote, officials have repeatedly declined to provide data on how many families have been separated, but suggested that the number was relatively low. New data revealed by the New York Times, however, shows that more than 700 children have been taken from adults claiming to be their parents since October, including more than 100 kids under the age of 4. The data was prepared by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, a division of the Department of Health and Human Services that takes custody of children who have been removed from migrant parents. Senior officials at Homeland Security initially denied that the numbers were so high. But after the numbers were confirmed to the New York Times by 3 federal officials who work closely with these cases, a spokesman for Health and Human Services on Friday acknowledged in a statement that there were, quote, approximately 700. So, of course, now we know it was much more than 700 kids. It was thousands of kids. But when that story broke in the New York Times in April 2018, that was the truth beginning to emerge. And the reason that much truth was able to emerge was because despite the shambolic and incompetent nature of the Trump administration generally and around this policy specifically, there were some people, some career civil servants, professionals working inside the government who made sure they made lists of some of the kids to whom this was happening. And as civil servants, they were supposed to do that. But, you know, Trump's horrific and morally repugnant policy kind of depended on them not doing it. We know that because we know what happened when the boss of these civil servants found out that they were keeping lists. There was a Trump political appointee whose actions are documented in detail in Jacob Soboroff's book, Separated, on which the film is based. And in the book, Soboroff reports that what that boss, that political appointee, did when he learned that civil servants were keeping lists of the separated kids. Quote, Scott Lloyd's first thought was a drastic one. Let's get rid of the list. If he followed the idea through, it would destroy the critical linkage between the 700 separated children in his custody and their parents. The list was the best hope of reuniting them. This list, this critical list compiled by career staff inside the government, ended up being key to 700 families being made whole, right? This was a civil servant. His colleagues referred to this list as Jim's list because his name was Jim. You will hear that in the movie tonight, Jim's list, this list that would allow these kids to ever be given back to their parents. That list, Jim's list, is what Scott Lloyd, the Trump appointee, wanted to get rid of. And unbelievably, in the film you're about to see here tonight on MSNBC, Scott Lloyd, the Trump appointee, talks at length and on camera to director Errol Morris. Whether he agreed to talk to Errol Morris out of shame or in defense or because he didn't know how he would sound in these interviews, I can't say. You will want to judge for yourself. It's a remarkable thing to see. But in terms of how this worked out in real time, the fact that there weren't just Scott Lloyds around, there weren't just Trump political appointees, there were career civil servants, that ends up being critically important over and over again. For example, when this news about this policy started to emerge in 2018, Scott Lloyd and his boss floated the idea that the government should record just numbers of kids taken away from their parents, and they should specifically not record any identifying details about who the kids were or how their parents could be found again. And they brought this concept to a career staffer, one who you will meet in the documentary tonight from Jacob Soboroff's book. Quote, Jalen Suelag, who has a master's degree in clinical psychology and 20 years of child welfare experience, knew she never could or would let that happen because of the consequences. So she said as little as possible to her boss. She said, quote, okay, I'll see what I can do. But then rather than getting rid of the list, she talked to her colleague. She talked to list keeper Jim from Jim's List, and she told Jim what the bosses wanted to do with the list he had been compiling. Quote, if Scott Lloyd expected Suelag to instruct Jim to stop keeping the list, she never did, nor did Jim do anything of the sort. On the contrary, he continued adding to it as the number of separated children rapidly grew. So Jim's List, which started at dozens, went to hundreds, ultimately thousands of entries. That would end up being all that stood between many of those kids and the abyss. And it was career staffers who kept that list alive. against the wishes of Trump's political appointees. And importantly, those career staffers also kept their jobs. And that's important because it meant they could keep doing this work that we now know saved some of these families. So here we go. I mean, today we're on the verge of a second Trump administration. That outcome of the career civil servants keeping the list, that outcome would be far from assured. Trump is returning to power now with new promises, not just to put millions of people in camps in the United States, not just promising mass deportations, but also Trump promising to take a chainsaw to the federal workforce to get all the career staff professionals out of government. Trump appointees have pledged that they're going to fire half of all government workers instantly. They've been bragging about, quote, deleting whole parts of the government. Trump himself has promised he's going to dismantle and shatter what he and his people call the deep state, which just means the government. He wants to reclassify career civil servants under something called Schedule F. And while that is the world's most boring terminology, what it means in real life is it would clear the way for Trump to fire tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who are career professionals who work for the government. Schedule F would have affected people like Jalen Suolog, who protected the list of separated kids in 2018 because she knew what would happen if that list were destroyed. Suolog works in the private sector now, but she told us this week, in advance of the film premiering tonight on MSNBC, she told us this week that her friends at her old job are really afraid, not so much about losing their jobs, although that's a very reasonable fear. She says they're worried about what would happen in another circumstance like this. Who would be there to do something like protecting that list of kids? In advance of the film premiering tonight here on MSNBC, Ms. Suolog told us this week, quote, "We were mission-focused and we knew what our job was. Had we not had the protections, meaning civil servant job protections, I'm not sure you would still do it knowing you'd be fired on the spot. The world would be different had Schedule F been in place." When I say that the story you're going to see tonight in Separated is not over, part of what I mean by that is the thousands of families who are torn apart. There are still efforts underway to fix that now. It was only late last year that the Biden administration reached a settlement with the ACLU to, among other things, try to reunite all the remaining families who had their kids taken away. That settlement is in effect still, and it will stay in effect under the new administration. The job of fulfilling that settlement will now go back to the same president, Donald Trump, who created this mess deliberately in the first place. But it will also go to his political appointees and to career professional staff in the government who will try to carry on with the work of the country regardless of who is in the White House. ACLU attorney Lee Gallant told us this week, quote, "The role played by the government employees was absolutely critical in ensuring that we could reunify thousands of families. I think my job will become much more difficult going forward if these types of courageous civil servants are no longer there or they are too scared to speak up under the incoming administration." Among
was essentially hijacked.
Jonathan White, a career officer in the U.S. Public Health Service. At great risk to himself, Captain Jonathan White has spoken out about family separation before Congress and in this film. Captain Jonathan White still serves in the government tonight, still at risk, still trying to help. But how long will that be true? And what is it going to take for the country to stand up for civil servants like him not being fired, not being removed from every one of these jobs? That is worth appreciating tonight. That may be next steps here when you watch this film. Amen.